Hi everyone, you're listening to She Leads with Carly. Our guest today is Amy Saper, a partner at Accel, a leading venture capital firm that works with startups in seed and growth stage investments. Amy shares advice about her personal career transitions, starting off in product-facing roles at top companies including Twitter and Stripe, to then transitioning into venture capital. We chat about the importance of relationships at each stage of your career, and you'll also hear Amy discuss the importance of really not getting caught up on the title of your role at a company. Rather, optimizing for growth and opportunity is way more important. We also chat about the gender disparity, especially present in the venture capital industry, and what needs to change. So much with this chat. I always learn so much from Amy, and I'm so excited for you guys to take a listen, hear her story, and learn how she leads. Enjoy. Hello, Amy. Thank you so much for joining She Leads today. I'm so excited to have you on this show. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Carly. I'm honored to be talking to you today.
Of course. So, Amy, you are a partner at Accel, which is a seed, early, growth stage venture capital firm. But before even entering VC and the venture capital world, you really were, around these product-facing roles, whether it's product management, product marketing, at top tech companies that we all know. So, Twitter, Uber, Stripe. And so we're going to get into all of that. But as I love to start off, take me back to your Stanford days. So you got a bachelor's at Stanford and you also got an MBA at the GSB. But, graduating from undergrad, where were you in your life at this point? So what were you imagining your career? How were you navigating? What was that next step?
Yeah. So I think by the time I graduated from Stanford, I was fairly certain that I wanted to be working on technology products that made the world a better place in some way, shape, or form, whether that's actually helping build and create those products or supporting the people who were building those products. I wasn't sure exactly what form that would take, but I knew I wanted to play some role in the technology ecosystem more broadly.
Yeah.
But if we take a little step back, I would say that was sort of clear to me as a graduating senior at Stanford. But before that, I had no idea. And it was a lot murkier when I first got to Stanford. My mom's a doctor, my dad's a lawyer. And so I think like most kids growing up, I kind of thought that maybe those were the only career paths ahead of me.
Yep.
And I certainly didn't know what a venture capitalist was at that point. I actually changed my mind about what I wanted to major in so many times that I had a folder on my desktop called 4-year plans. And every time I came up with a new idea, I would map out a whole other 4-year plan.
Yep.
But thankfully, over the course of my time at Stanford, I was able to take a couple of classes in computer science and about launching products and entrepreneurship. I did the Mayfield Fellows program, which I know you also were a part of.
Yeah.
And so I was able to meet a lot of really interesting people that were either investors or founders or operators at companies. And so I felt pretty certain about roughly what I wanted to do by the time I graduated. I think that the nuances were certainly left to be figured out at that point.
Yeah. And I could relate to that. Like I came into Stanford thinking, I'll be a doctor. My dad's a doctor. My sister's in that. So definitely, you think these conventional fields and then you kind of discover more as you, meet more people and learn more. So then, take me after graduating, how did you approach this job search? Because I believe Twitter was your first job. So,
Yep.
Tell me about that experience, how you found it, and then how you knew like this is a great fit and I'm happy here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when I've been at these major decision points in my life, and kind of the most obvious ones might be upon graduating from undergrad or graduating from business school, I've always optimized above all else for working with fantastic people that I really feel like I can learn from. And I am a very stereotypical type A overachiever type. And so I make a lot of spreadsheets. So I would say at both of these points in time, I collected what my criterion were for how I wanted to make these decisions. Some of them were a little bit more superficial, like how many people were at the company, where was the company located. Some were a little bit more nuanced around my perception of the company culture or the strengths and weaknesses of my would-be manager or my personal connection to the products that the companies were making. And I would add up all of these sort of rows and columns. And then I was lucky enough to have a couple of great options at both the undergrad stage and then did this exercise again when I graduated from business school. And I got into this exercise where I added up the points that I basically assigned to all of these different criteria. And then I immediately looked at, what score the spreadsheet kind of gave me. And I checked in to see how that made me feel. And so it was kind of this combination analytical and emotional response where I think in the Twitter case, I honestly couldn't tell you what the result of my spreadsheet was, but it wasn't Twitter. It was something else. And I remember just realizing that I was disappointed and I was hoping that it would lead me to Twitter. And that was kind of all the data that I needed. So I had met a couple of folks at Twitter through the Mayfield Fellows program, actually, because a lot of the earliest employees at Twitter, when I first met them, they were about 100 people, had gone through that program as well. And I just remembered feeling super energized by those conversations and excited about the products and the impact that Twitter was already starting to have on the world, even though at the time, none of my friends or family members or people in my network were using the product. But I was just excited about the possibility and the use cases there. And so that was what led me to make that decision.
Yeah. So it seems like you have these spreadsheets, like all the numbers are there, the points are there. But at the end of the day, you really did go with your gut. And it's almost like once you have all the points, how do I feel about that? And then you make that decision. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
So also curious, about the culture aspect of that. What are some tips that you have to really determine what is a good culture from in that interview stage? Because maybe you don't get to talk to so many people, or maybe you don't know so many people at the company. So how do you really gauge okay, I can really grow and foster in this great culture?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because culture means something so completely different to so many people. And I don't think that there's any kind of one culture that's better than others, but I've been a part of 3 very different cultures at Twitter, Uber, and Stripe. And I think there are a couple of different dimensions that you can sort of use to evaluate where a company might fall. And so I think some of those might be, especially if you're talking about early career professionals, is what are the growth opportunities and to what extent are you expected to operate kind of within a very specific function. And this tends to shift as the company gets larger. And as the company gets larger, you tend to be more focused on very specific jobs and roles. And that doesn't mean that you can't eventually move into a different role or kind of flex outside of your job title. But I think getting a sense of how collaborative the function and the company is and whether you're kind of rewarded for raising your hand to take on new challenges or not. Right. I think that I actually ask questions, maybe this is a moot point in a COVID world, but I ask questions about where do people eat lunch, where it seems so kind of, superficial, but are people kind of grabbing food and sitting at their own desk? Are they taking 20 minutes to forge relationships with their colleagues? And I think as someone who is, new to entering the workforce, I really wanted to be at a place where I felt they did a great job of fostering community. I think as I moved on, especially at Uber and Stripe, there were a couple of other areas that I tended to optimize around. And so some of those were speed and pace of execution and ability to take risks and try new things and appetite for throwing a bunch of darts at the wall and figuring out what's stuck. And I think that different companies have different approaches to kind of risk-taking versus perfectionism. And when you're working on the product, those things matter a lot. I think that there are certainly communication norms and transparency. I actually interned once at a 10-person startup that I thought was much more opaque than Twitter was at 200 people by the time I joined. And so just because a company has a certain number of employees doesn't mean that everyone has kind of equal access to the leadership team or to major decisions that the company is making. So those are a couple of different areas that I think can be reflective of what a company's culture is like.
Yeah, so interesting. I think those are great pointers. I love that. So now walk me through, your mentality and your stage, kind of reaching the tail end of Twitter. What made you decide, okay, it's time to get an MBA, or maybe it's just time to transition to another company or another role? What was going through your mind?
Yeah, so I think first of all, while I was at Twitter, I got the opportunity to wear many different hats, which was really unbelievable. And I think is reflective of just the stage of hypergrowth that Twitter was at. Yeah. And so I started to get more of a sense for what were those components of roles that I really enjoyed and that really gave me energy. And I think that those are distinct from the job title itself. Mm-hmm. So, for example, for me, I really strived to be in roles where I could be both internally facing and externally facing, and where I could work closely to the product, but also closely to revenue, roles that kind of relied on strong communication skills. And I think above all else, which has been a common theme throughout my career, I really enjoy being the nexus of different groups of people. So whether that was, coordinating 17 different groups of people across a major product launch, or working with our partners on the ground in the Middle East or Southeast Asia, and then relaying that information back to our engineering team back in San Francisco, or now in my role where I get to work across all sorts of different groups of disparate people. I figured out that those were kind of the core ingredients that I was really excited about. And I was lucky to have been placed in so many interesting roles and kind of raised my hand for new opportunities over the course of about 4.5 years at Twitter. Yeah. But by the time that I was coming up on the end of my time there, I just realized that the rate of learning I felt was decelerating. And I had just unbelievable opportunities. In my last year at Twitter, I was actually living in Southeast Asia. I moved to Singapore to help open our office and our headquarters for Asia Pacific. And I'd kind of been living on a plane for the last 18 months. Yeah. And so that was an amazing opportunity. But then after having been in Singapore for a year, I just started to get the feeling that I wanted to take on a new challenge. And I wasn't exactly sure what that was. And so to me, going back to grad school was a really great opportunity to get to try to learn a ton of new skills in a really short period of time. Yeah. So that was part of the decision for me.
Yeah. And then also in that like job search process, so like going to Uber, Stripe, what is some advice that you have for others, whether, are you looking at like the title, like being a product marketer or product management, or how did you really distill like what company and role are like the best fit for you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I would say I spend a lot of time talking to undergrads or business school students who are trying to figure out what that next step of their career might be. And I think this is maybe the most common mistake that I see, or where I give people feedback pretty frequently. I think that, I shared what some of those ingredients were to me of the attributes of a role that I felt would be a great fit for me. And you'll notice that I didn't say that meant being a partnerships manager or being a product manager or being a product marketer, because the title changes company by company and stage by stage. And I think the actual components of the role, if you distill it down into its core building blocks, are way more important. And the being at an environment where you have the opportunity to take on a ton of new stretch assignments and new opportunities and grow really quickly, I think is way more important than whatever box you kind of check your name next to on the offer letter. And I see that happen all the time. That I would suggest that someone finds a company where there's hyper growth and lots of really interesting opportunities, where they know that if they do well, there will be more and more challenges that are thrown at them that they can kind of raise their hand to take on, more so than saying, I got whatever title I thought I wanted at potentially a mediocre company. So I think that, over time, I do think that it's important to build an area of focus or expertise, because that just makes it easier when, people like me now in venture capital are trying to search for people who fit a certain role to slot them into, portfolio companies or other companies. And so I think that's not diminishing the importance of picking an area of expertise eventually. But when you're early in your career, I think it's a much bigger risk to over-optimize for title and role early on, rather than kind of the pace of growth and the breadth of opportunities.
Yeah, very interesting, and especially like very valuable to me, entering the workforce. It's more so like, what am I passionate about? Am I passionate about this company? And then within that, I'll find a role. Regardless, I'll love it because I'm passionate about the product that they're building or whatever it is. So I think that's very, very valuable. So, okay. Now, coming out of, Stanford GSB, did you have more clarity of, what you saw your future as? Like, did you want to stay in tech? Was VC kind of coming into your mind at this point, or still not really?
It's a great question. So actually, I would say at the point that I was graduating, venture capital was not top of mind. That I had first heard about this function. So despite growing up in Silicon Valley, I had no idea what a VC was until I got to Stanford, and then I got to meet some of them and learn about this mythical role where you got to partner with all these unbelievable entrepreneurs that wanted to make the world a better place and learn about new technologies and products on a daily basis. And I filed that in the back of my head as, someday this sounds like a really interesting combination of my skills and interests. I've kind of always been that person that friends and family go to about, what new app or gadget or service should I be using? That's just the way that my brain works, and I am endlessly curious. I also love playing a people connector role. So I think that those were things that I had certainly thought about, but by the time I was graduating, like, I don't think I did a single coffee chat with a VC while I was at business school. It was just not something that was top of mind. I really, really loved the complete cycle of building and launching a product, from talking to customers and hearing their pain points, getting it on a product roadmap, working on it, launching the product, gathering that feedback. I just think that's such a fun, gratifying cycle. And so I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And for me, the question was, where did I want to do that? And I first was connected to the founders of Stripe through some peers of mine at Twitter. And I remember meeting them at their old office in the Mission and just walking away from those first conversations thinking, I will literally be the janitor at Stripe if I get the opportunity to be around these people. And I thought that their ability to articulate this broader vision of democratizing access to entrepreneurship and increasing the GDP of the internet was so inspiring, but also I think combined with the ability to articulate in the short term what are the goals that we most need to nail to hit that next milestone, I thought was really rare. And so I think that, as has been true kind of throughout my career, I've been guided above all else by the people that I work with and the broader mission of what the company does. And so when I felt that those two things aligned, it was kind of a no-brainer for me.
Yeah, I love it. And so now tell me, you've been at these top companies, whether it's Twitter, Uber, Stripe, and oftentimes, like, as this day and age, it's very rare to stay at a company for that long. So it's pretty common to now, go try different companies. What advice would you say is for people who are at these companies, having different leaders that they're reporting to, different managers, but they're still making, how do you make sure that you're still, thinking of yourself and thinking of your own professional growth? Is there, because I feel like it's easy to get lost in that.
Totally. And I think that you hit on a key point, which is that, at hyper growth companies, there are going to be reorgs and shifts in strategy, and your job title might change. And kind of the only constant is change at these companies. And I think especially for people for whom this is their first time experiencing that, it can be pretty unsettling. Even at kind of the best growth stage companies, that is completely normal because priorities shift, new competitors emerge, market dynamics evolve. And so you kind of have to constantly be reinventing yourself. And I think back to a piece of advice that one of my managers gave me at Twitter that I still think about to this day, which he told me that you're the only person who is in charge of your career destiny. And I've been lucky enough to have fantastic mentors and advisors and managers throughout my career who have been looking out for me. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's ultimately on you to make sure that you're raising your hand for those new opportunities and advocating for yourself and putting yourself in opportunities to grow. Yeah. And so I think what I started to get in the habit of, after having been through a couple of different manager and org shifts at Twitter, I developed this practice for myself where I would create my own career plan template. And whenever I had a new manager, I would proactively schedule a conversation to go over that with them because I didn't want to have to feel like I was starting from ground zero each time. Yeah. So on my template, I included, here's what I think of as my 3 greatest strengths. These are 3 areas that I'm actively working on. Here are my biggest professional accomplishments, what I'm most proud of. And here is how I think about my career in terms of what goals I hope to achieve, where I want to be in 1 year, and then in a couple of years, and then longer term, to kickstart a conversation so that we could both be aligned as new opportunities came up, that they would understand what I was optimizing for. Yeah. And then it was something that I also shared as I started building out my own team, and I found really valuable when my direct reports took that same ownership over their career.
Wow, I love that. I think that's so every new, when there's a reorg, every new manager, leader, you made that, conscious effort to say, look, let's sit down for a chat and let me just show you where I'm at professionally. I
think, because managers differ. Some managers are fantastic. Some managers are mediocre, and they're not always going to not all managers are going to proactively go to each one of their direct reports and ask them what their goals and interests are. Hopefully they do. I think it's sort of a best practice, but I think that was a way for me to help kind of shape that conversation and make sure that I was always kind of thinking about my own learning and what I wanted to kind of achieve in that next stage of growth.
Yeah, incredible. So, okay, before we get into, Accel entering the VC world, I am interested in, you mentioned mentorship. And obviously, like, Mayfield Fellows program is an incredible program, and we get a lot of mentors from that program. But do you have advice for someone who, maybe they don't have a mentor, but they want that person. They want that person to, just have a sounding board, get advice from. Is there any advice to really like seek out a mentor? Is that better? Even, I don't know what you think.
Yeah. So I think mentorship is really a two-way street. And I think, as you mentioned, at Stanford and through the Mayfield Fellows program, you're kind of assigned mentors, but in the real world, you really have to find them on your own. Yeah. And so for me, I think of them almost more as my personal board of advisors. And my first set of those individuals were the early crew at Twitter. And now actually, I was just checking my calendar and realizing that this week I have 5 conversations with people that I met almost a decade ago in my first year at Twitter, who I still go to for advice and to bounce ideas off of. But I like to think that it's also a little bit more of a two-way street. And I've now been able to help some of them as they are raising money or looking for people to hire or finding new companies to invest in. And so I think depending on that individual person, there might be different things that's more top of mind for them. Something that I started doing early on in my career at Twitter actually is when you have a one-on-one with either your manager or someone that you see kind of as a, aspirational mentor. Yeah. First of all, you should own the agenda. So come in with things that you specifically want to get their feedback on or ask them about. So don't put the onus on them because they're probably really busy and are taking time out of their day to spend time with you. Yeah. And I think the other thing that I would do is ask them what was most top of mind for them and what was taking up their mind share, and see if there was anything that I could do to just take things off their plate. And so I did that over and over again. And that, I think, helped kind of forge stronger relationships with those people. Yeah. Because then in a way you're kind of tying yourself to their success. And if you can help them be successful, then they're going to be more invested in you as well. Yeah. And so I think especially when I was early on in my career, I found that strategy to also be valuable.
Amazing. So, okay, so now you're at Stripe. And so first in your, career plan, 3 to 5 years, when did venture capital come into it? Or, was it written in your career template? Or
it was in the longer term plan at that point. Okay. So I did, and I think I had a combination. I had my day job at Stripe where I was primarily taking products to market and coordinating across engineers and designers and communications and building and launching products across Stripe's suite of applications products. These are tools for marketplaces, SaaS businesses, and so forth. Yeah. And I absolutely loved that. I think that the people that I got to work with at Stripe are just unbelievable. And the level of execution is just frankly unparalleled at Stripe, even now seeing it from the outsider's perspective. So I feel really lucky to have been a part of that journey. Yeah. But I also had kind of the work that I was doing in my 120% time, if you will, which was working with early stage founders, either who I met through Stripe's Atlas product, which is a startup incorporation tool, or friends and peers of mine from Stanford and Twitter and other places that were starting products of their own. And I kind of naturally became this person that people would go to seek out advice from if they were facing challenges that maybe I had dealt with, like running a beta product or gathering feedback from customers or launching a product, expanding internationally, and so forth. Yeah. And so I had started realizing that I got a lot of energy from working with founders and bouncing ideas off of them at the earliest stages. So while I really loved my role at Stripe and felt so privileged to get to work in that environment, it was sort of at the back of it became clear in my last year at Stripe that I was really interested in investing and what that might look like. And so Accel had reached out at a point where on the surface, it seemed like maybe the worst time from a personal perspective to make a big shift. But when I saw, and that's, I think I've shared with you, but I think when we first had these conversations, I had just found out that I was pregnant. I had just been promoted at Stripe. And so there's no way that this seemed like the optimal time to make a big career transition. Yeah. But the more and more I learned about the role and the more that I got to meet more members of the team at Accel, I've known some of them for close to a decade. The more I just realized that this was an unbelievable opportunity that would be really hard to pass up.
Yeah, incredible. So now tell me about this transition, because you're going from, product facing roles, tech companies, early, like hyper growth companies to now early stage seed stage companies. How was this transition from, tech to VC? Challenges along the way? Anything that you encountered that you're just like, wow, that was kind of a hard time, or how was it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think thankfully I've been able to kind of leverage some of my operational experience, I would say maybe more than I had anticipated, in that I really enjoy whiteboarding with founders and mapping out how they think about category creation and storytelling and all of these skills that I got to hone in my time at Stripe and Twitter in particular.
Yeah.
And I find that really fun. And that's why I love early stage investing, because you really get to be hands-on and partner with these founders. That being said, it is such an unbelievably different role and a different skill set when you're in more of a supporting role versus the person who is actually rolling up your sleeves and building the product.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, one of the biggest challenges has been adjusting to the goal setting and feedback loops in VC. So I had come from this world where I had weekly goals that I would report on my own progress and on a monthly basis. And we had quarterly OKRs and biannual feedback sessions. And you could kind of see, hey, what did I do this week? And how did that map to what the broader goals are for either myself, my team, the company? And there's something really satisfying and rewarding about being able to see, hey, I put in all of this hard work and here was the output. It doesn't work like that in venture. So our feedback loops are so much longer that, they say you don't really know if you're good at this job for a decade, because when you're partnering with companies at the earliest stages, that's kind of how long it typically takes on average to see some kind of a massive liquidity event. Yeah. And so obviously there are interim goals along the way. Are the companies that you're investing in, are they able to recruit great people? Are they raising follow-on rounds? And so, but even those are pretty long horizons. And so that's been something that I've been kind of rewiring for myself, is how do I want to measure my own success in this job? And what that looks like is fundamentally different than what it does when you are at a company. Yeah. And I'm lucky enough to be at a place where my partners at Accel are constantly providing feedback and encouragement as I kind of move through my first year as a venture capitalist. But I will say that has definitely been an adjustment.
Yeah, definitely. And then, so what would you say are like 3 key skills that makes a good venture capitalist? Because you're new in this still, and it's still like a year or so, but still, like, what are those new skills that you've had to add on that you're like, okay, this is important for a good VC to have?
Yeah, I think that certainly curiosity is really, really, really important. So being interested in the nuances of various different sectors and categories, that it's not uncommon for me to have a day where I go from talking to a company building fintech infrastructure to a new consumer mental health platform, and then a remote work SaaS product in one day. That's actually the day I had yesterday. And so I think being able to context switch and dive deep into certain areas to really start to figure out what are the levers in this business, and how do I distill all of the different details into what are the most important pieces to evaluate around what I think will lead to a winning company in this category. And I think that is certainly a new skill set, but one that I think I was able to kind of leverage just from my own sort of innate curiosity in the past. Yeah. But that's definitely an important skill. I think that one of the things that I am learning to be even more true than I thought going into this is how much of this job, especially in early stage investing, is about taking bets on people and being able to discern talent when you have nothing else to go off of. So how do you know whether someone is truly exceptional and whether they are the right person to be building this particular company? And I think that's something that I'm constantly learning from my partners and other mentors in venture. But I think that is a really, really important skill at this stage. It's a topic for another day, or on how you do that in a world where you're only meeting people over Zoom, because I think that adds a whole other layer of complexity. But I think that's really important. And I think one of the other things also, just as that's maybe more particular to people who have come from being founders or operators into being venture capital, is just being comfortable with the role of coach or being more in the sidelines. That I've definitely seen people who have made the same transition who still kind of miss building themselves and want to give really particular suggestions that they're kind of annoyed by if the founders don't accept those pieces of advice. So I always try to be cautious, especially in a board meeting setting. I know how much weight words coming out of a VC's mouth can have, because I've been on the receiving end of some of these sort of innocuous questions and all the work that gets spun up. And so I think that being really thoughtful about your role and understanding kind of where you can best help founders and where you might need to step back even if it's just killing you, that you want to kind of come in and say something. I think that's also been a really important skill set that I've come to learn.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And even I think you mentioned the second point, how, it's like really judging people and the character. And I would argue that you've kind of been doing this your whole career. Because like when you talk about the different companies that you're going at, like that's something that, is a key criteria for you. It's really just like, who are the people that I'm going to learn from and be my best self working for. So I think that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we can go on to fun questions, I am curious, as a new VC, tell me about your experience as a female venture capitalist, because obviously, there's a gap between founders, funders, all of that. So tell me how your experience is, and then also what do you think needs to happen to, continue to narrow that gap?
Yeah. So, this is a question that I find tricky, because I would say historically, if I look back on my career, I've never really thought of myself as a female product marketer, product manager, or a female VC. That I've kind of just felt like Amy in this role. Maybe there are a couple of exceptions, like time for another story, but when I was on a business trip in Saudi Arabia back at Twitter, I definitely felt like the only woman in the room, and that was pretty apparent. But in general, I kind of just show up as myself. However, I do know that there is such a discrepancy in terms of gender and race and socioeconomic background in this industry. And it's something that I'm personally really passionate about. I think that we need more women in both founder roles and funder roles. We need more racial diversity across the board, as we're seeing, really highlighted in 2020 in particular. Yeah. And so I think it's something that's near and dear to my heart. I think I'm probably too early to be able to tell how my experience might be different than men in this role. Yeah. And I think part of that might just be because I feel really lucky to be at a platform where I am supported and treated as an equal and surrounded by mentors who are invested in my career. And I know that that's not the case for women everywhere in venture, and it should be. So I'm also really grateful to other female venture capitalists who have paved the way for my generation. Yeah. And I hope to someday be in a position to do the same to the next generation of female VCs.
Definitely. And also, so have you had, female VCs who are also, new moms? Because how's that balance? You have a 1-year-old daughter, I believe. And so how's that process, not only in COVID and, that's all, it brings itself its own craziness, but how is that been for you?
I definitely have been able to seek out advice from other women who have also made the transition around the time that they had kids. Yeah. I think I started at Accel when our daughter was 4 months old. So it was definitely, I had a lot of life changes happening at once. I will say, I think that, I'm incredibly grateful to have had a really, really supportive husband and a lot of childcare help, which I know is not the case for everyone, but I think made this transition so much easier. I also didn't realize it. I think people tell you this, but you don't realize it until you are one. New parents are unbelievably productive. My ability to prioritize when I am on is so much better now, when before you might have taken a break to kind of scroll Instagram or, do whatever outlet, you wanted to kind of fill the gaps. Yeah. I know that every minute that I'm doing that I'm not working, is potentially a minute that I could have been spending, with my daughter and with our family. And so I think when I'm on, I am on. And I think that I found that to be true kind of across the board. Yeah. But yeah, I would say having a village and support of people is really important, definitely. Or has been for me in this transition, at least.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, Amy, tell me now, what is a passion or hobby that you have that's just completely unrelated to any work?
Yeah. So this is one that's been really painful in 2020, but I am obsessed with traveling. My passion for travel peaked at Twitter. I managed launches in emerging markets. So I was living on a plane between the Middle East, Southeast Asia, India, Australia, getting to meet and make friends in all far-flung corners of the world. I had this goal of visiting 50 countries by 30, which I actually got to do on our honeymoon. My 50th country was Rwanda. Oh. If you ever have the chance to do the gorilla trek, I highly recommend it. It was unbelievable. So that is definitely a huge passion of mine, especially someone who was born and raised in the Bay Area, and I live in San Francisco now. So I think that typically in non-COVID times, I use any vacation time that I have to get out to far-flung corners of the world. We actually took our daughter, to Europe twice in her first 8 months, which was really fun. And so I've now kind of become that go-to person with the Google Doc on how to travel with babies amongst my circle of friends and family, because I didn't want that to slow down just because we became parents. But that's something that I am really, really passionate about.
I love it. I love traveling too. I can relate. It's a beautiful experience. I agree. Okay, last question. So first, Amy, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been so fun. But last question is, tell me a weird or fun talent that you have that no one really knows about. So a hidden talent. So I'm going to go first. So what I do is I throw blueberries into my mouth. All right, here we go. Okay. There we go.
Wow, nice work. That's impressive.
It was a little stressful. I only had one, so I had to make it.
I don't think I have anything that I could necessarily show off right now, or certainly that's not that impressive. But talent, maybe it's maybe less hidden for people that have known me well, but for people that only know me professionally, I'm a singer. So I've been singing my whole life. I did California State Honor Choir growing up. I sang in an a cappella group at Stanford. I kind of peaked. My singing career, unfortunately, peaked in college. But my claim to fame was we got to open for Ben Folds at the Hollywood Palladium, which was really, really fun. Wow. And now, typically that kind of comes out in karaoke. We did a lot of karaoke at Twitter and at Stripe. So I guess you could call that kind of my hidden talent.
Oh my God.
Maybe I'll show that off next time we chat.
Yes. Okay, great. That sounds great. That's awesome. Well, Amy, thanks again for coming on the show. It's been so fun, and I'm so excited for others just to learn from you, hear your story and everything. So really, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a good one. Bye.